So, upon request, we have decided to do a video on the install on our X-Maxx split drive system. Comes with a press bearing, the spline, a pre-cut shaft for front and rear, and also the center block that houses the bearing. A couple of tools required. It's a 2.0 and a 2.5 hand tool, or in this scenario, just for time and video, we're going to go ahead and use speed bits. Anybody that has worked on the X-Maxx knows to go ahead and take the wheels and the body off so that you can manipulate it on the workbench. Makes it a little easier to handle. First part, we're going to take off the under chassis and the drive cover. Second part, we're going to release the front and rear bulkheads so you can open them up about a ½ an inch. You don't have to fully disassemble, so your wiring and steering, you never really have to fully disconnect. But from there, we're going to go ahead and jump in. Everything pretty much on the bottom of the undercarriage is 2.5. Start with the center cover. You don't have to do anything to remove the motor mounts of any type, so just the outer cover screw set. This install is also the same for the X-Maxx drive stiffener that we sell. It comes with 2 bearings, and it uses an uncut shaft that passes through them. You'll have to make the same, or do the same procedures so that you can have access to the front and rear splines with some play to install. Here's where the part is going to drop in, and we'll get into more of that as we open up the 2 bulkheads. The front bulkhead, we're going to do left and right on the outer chassis. Pair of pliers will assist on any stubborn hexes that haven't released from the plastic. Side mount for the cross brace. Servo brace front end only. Should give you access to loosen up the front bulkhead. I keep those screws separate from the back. It's kind of the same, left, right, 2-piece to the chassis. If I remember correctly, you also have to lift the gear cover, belt drive cover, or any of that you might have on any modified X-Maxxes. The last little bit to release are the inner chassis rails, the lower inner chassis rails. These two hold the rear. I'm going to go ahead and try to remove these four so we don't lose them as we manipulate the chassis back and forth. This is just a 0.05. Get a little further in there. Try to push the screw out. Now from there, the entire chassis will front and rear release. You really don't have to go too far. So again, anybody with aftermarket lighting, wires, steering, you don't have to disconnect anything. You just have to manipulate it so you get a little separation on either side. Anybody that's had a bent drive shaft knows how to pull the original out. If you ever want to go back to stock, you'll have this, or if you have a problem with it, you can always cut yours. Put that off to the side. Now the block is recessed, so it is offset by the screw backs, so you really can't put it in the wrong way. Just goes in completely like that. The bearing, so your original shaft may or may not pull out the rear spline from the diff, but if it doesn't, you're going to want to make sure this part is part of your reinstall. Obviously there are two parts to the shaft, one is shorter than the other one. What you want to do is make sure that the rear has the spline in it. Go ahead and do the slide in until you're fully seated. Basically, you can tell already it's starting to line up, but you don't want to compress it just yet until you have the bearing spline in. I'm going to insert the longer shaft in the front side. Make sure we're fully seated. Here's where the fun begins. Press spline will drop in. Get your alignment. And that pretty much wraps up the install. We'll go through the buttoning back up. You want to kind of do it in the same sequence as you did to take it apart. So I'm going to flip it back over, maintaining pressure on both front and rear. It's pretty solid to this point, but you don't want to close up the bottom and then not have access to something that may have gone awry. So I'm going to go back through, do the center rail of the lower chassis. I'm going to do the front and the rear bulkhead, reinstalling the mounts. Pro tip, anybody that's using a power drill needs to know not to over tighten into plastic. guys have any of that issue right there with a little bit of mud, just a quick little rub with an X-Acto knife helps clean out anything, the dirt that's collected in there. Through the front bulkhead. By the way, when you reinstall, there is a layer system of each left and right wing right here that you need to make sure is lined up before you start attaching. The rear is kind of free floating. You don't have to worry about it as much. It kind of lands into place naturally. As you reassemble, make sure your battery straps have not fallen out of position and out of channel. It kind of makes it a hassle. I was really careful. I've done it a few times, so these may slide out of their tab channels when you take that chassis and separate it. So just be careful of that. Flip it back over to the underneath. Very easy. The front and rear diff plates slide on first. Slight modification inside of this system. You can ask via our website or whether or not we include one of these or buy one of these pre-prepped for you. It's a very easy set. It's almost self-explanatory when you line it up. Here are the 4 holes for the motor mounts, so you leave those. But what we're going to do is clip out basically everything between this rib and this rib, and it'll leave plenty of space for this bearing not to contact. So most everybody has some form of wire snips. These are pretty easy. Again, the alignment is, see where that bearing is? We're going to clip the wall from here to here, and then here to here, down to that surface. Just a little snip. A little snip. Again, a little, basically scoring it. And then with our needle nose, should be able to work this out of position. Just like that. Same thing here, inside the light. I'm just going to do a little bend. And it snips away fairly clean. And that's just to give clearance so that this bearing doesn't make contact with the plastic surface. Any of those true hobbyists out there have a few tools. If you want to send a Dremel in there, you need to take a knife, an X-Acto knife of some sort, clean out the excess material if the snips weren't to begin with. Like here's one that's an example of very clean, and here's one that's a little gnarly. You can take an X-Acto knife, clean up those edges, which I'll do off camera, but it's really not hard. You're not trying to, you know, get it at below any type of main surface area. Just get rid of the burrs, much like that. This goes right in, fully seats, and you finish with your screwing. Here's where the separation of the screws really comes into play. So you know front and rears, lengths and positions. Same thing I did with the front and the rear bulkhead sets. The center cover going back on, personal preference here, I like to start with the inside four and then work my way out. It helps it settle down into its groove a little easier. And here, front or rear, doesn't matter at this point. See, fully seated, back into its original position. We have travel of the diff, no noises, no loose parts. That's the install of the X-Maxx split drive set from AJC. The supported drive shaft kit that we sell is virtually the same, except for the spline and the dual shaft is not included. A center cap is included that doesn't require any snipping of that center channel. Just so you guys know, it's applicable to both sides. Removal of the bottom plates, or loosening of the bottom plates, separation of the front and rear bulkheads, coming back in, putting either the split system or the supported system in, and then reassembly of the front and rear back up, do your screws back in. That's it.